Cup of Joe with Grandpa Dez. Hey, Preet, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Paul. I got to hear that live for once. That's great.
Yeah. Sometimes it takes people aback, but I know you listen to the show or
Yeah.
watch the show. I mean, you can do both now. I have just got the podcast feed going, so
Oh,
people
perfect.
can. Yeah,
Good.
so I'm doing is I'm combining three, and then as they start to get longer, I'll probably do two episodes into one, so that because I think people like to listen to their podcasts,
Yeah.
in like an hour, give her little higher, a little lower than an hour, I think is a sweet spot. So we were
Yeah.
actually just talking about that in the among the Fight Game Media podcasters,
Oh,
saying
yeah.
what's the the ideal length of a podcast. What do you think? You
Yeah.
listen to a lot of podcasts.
Yeah. I think my ideal length is probably between 45 minutes to an hour.
Yeah,
Yeah. Personally, for
that's
me. Yeah.
that seems to be the consensus. I mean, we tend to go a little longer. And
Yeah.
personally, I kind of get mad at myself when I go too long, because I think, like, if
Right.
you're listening to a lot of podcasts and you look down at your feed and you see, oh, 2 hours, maybe I don't have time for that one today, and then you delete it, and it really sucks because it might have been really good.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I make an effort to do that. So
Right. Like, for
so.
example, like with Wrestling Observer Radio, Dave's
Mhm.
show. It's always about like an hour 20, hour 30.
And
But I'll look at the timestamps and I'll be like, okay, I'm probably going to skip that section because I do want to keep it to about an hour.
Yeah, and see, and for me too is, I kind of prioritize things. So,
Yeah.
like, I will listen to certain shows if I have time, but if
Mhm.
I'm running low and then I have to make a choice, then I'm always going to listen to Wrestling Observer Radio.
Right.
But they have so many shows on that feed, and I don't want to offend anyone because I'm friends with a lot of people and some of them might be watching. But you know what? If your
Right.
show's too long, I might delete it. Just
Yeah.
if I'm not familiar with the guest, or if I'm not terribly interested in the subject matter.
Yep.
But the
Yeah.
length is a big part.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I kind of wanted to have you on for a while. I guess we've
Yeah.
probably known each other for a couple of years now, and
Yeah. I think so.
and
Probably about
yeah,
that.
and you're in Victoria, right?
Yeah. Victoria, BC. Yeah.
Y-
Born and raised.
So this is the second person in a row I've had on that lives in Victoria.
Oh,
Uh,
really? I
yeah,
actually haven't had a chance to watch your latest show. So now
yeah,
definitely going my
John.
way. Yeah.
Yeah, so that one's a little different.
Mhm.
He's just a longtime friend. Haven't seen him in a few years. But we used to, we were running buddies for years. Grandpa, like me, a young grandpa.
Yeah.
It was kind of funny because he had a child from a previous relationship, and he didn't even realize he had her
Mhm.
until she was like a teenager. So he became, he developed a relationship with her. Then she had a kid. So he was like
Cool.
41 and a grandpa. So that was kind of,
Yeah.
people joke about me being young, and he
Right.
looks young too. So
Right.
yeah, so that was a
Well,
good show.
what I was gonna say too, you're speaking of you looking young, you got
Yeah.
rid of the gimmick
Yeah.
and you're more like young Uncle Des now.
There you
Yeah.
go. Yeah. Well, I did it because I was on a different show. In fact,
Right.
the Mankind one. And I still got the books up there. I just noticed. But yeah, we were actually, during the show, you might get a kick out of this if you watch it, because I was Googling, because he kind of told me where he was in Victoria, and I lived in Victoria for a few years.
Right.
I think we've talked about that.
Yeah,
Eh,
yeah, I think quickly just a couple weeks ago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and so I grew up. So I can't even remember when I looked it up. We were around, like, in I think the suburb is Saanich,
Yeah.
and there's a strip mall there with a McDonald's, and I was on Short Street, which
Short Street.
is
Yeah, I know Short Street. Yeah.
okay. There you go. So,
Yeah.
so it's different now. Back then, it was like they were all houses,
Mhm.
and now I think it's like condos, right? Because
Oh,
I
yeah.
looked, yeah,
Oh, in that area especially, there's been a lot of development, and if I'm thinking of the right strip mall that you're thinking of,
yeah,
it's completely different now. Like, totally up
yeah.
to date, bigger buildings, everything. Yeah.
So yeah, because the McDonald's is on one side of the highway, and then the strip mall is across the street. So
Right.
we had there's a big fence between the McDonald's and the residential stuff on Short Street. And my buddy Craig lived in the house that was right behind McDonald's, or vice versa. McDonald's
Yeah.
was right behind his house, and we would try to climb the wall to get to, even though like,
Right.
I mean, it's a huge wall and it was stupid. We're kids, right? I mean,
Right.
all we had to do is walk around the block, but we just kind of thought it was cool to be able to jump a wall and be at McDonald's.
Right.
But yeah, so yeah, I have so many memories. And the weird thing is we went back there in like 93. So I was there in probably 81 to 83. And so we went back there in like 93, or maybe it was 94.
Yeah.
And it was pretty much how I remembered it.
Yep.
But in my mind, because I went from being a little kid, like 10 years old, to being an adult with kids. By the time I was 22, we had 2 kids. And so for me, that was like a lifetime. So it felt like 20, 30 years had passed. Now in my mind, I'm still a dad, now I'm a grandpa, but I mean, it doesn't feel like 30 years ago that I was there. So in my mind, it feels like it should be the same as it was the last time I was there. And then when I Googled it, I was kind of shocked, and because I looked at the images and it looks totally different. And
completely different. Yeah.
Yeah. But talking to John, like, it's the same kind of thing. Like he'll go for a run, and, like wherever you are in Victoria, like if you run for an hour, you'll probably get downtown. Like it's that small, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's the kind of the great thing about Victoria is that you're never too far away from anything. And what's really happened is the West Shore, Langford, has really expanded, which is just on the outskirts of Victoria, but tons of expansion out there. But even from there into Victoria, it doesn't take long. However, traffic is a lot worse nowadays, so it takes
I'd
longer
imagine,
than it used to. But they've done some highway kind of a remodeling just to ease that up. But yeah, that's what I've always loved about Victoria is that it's, in my opinion, being born and raised here, it's not too big, it's not too small.
And you're what, mid 30s?
40. 41.
Okay,
41,
wow.
Sorry.
Wow.
Yeah, the COVID brains got me forgetting I had a birthday since COVID started. But 41. Yeah.
So you're not that much younger than me.
Not too much. No, I was born in 1980. Yeah.
So I mean, we were, technically there at the same time. I went to Cloverdale School. I don't know if you know where that is.
Oh yeah, we actually don't live too far away from it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
And that's what I was doing because I remembered in my mind that it took me about 20 minutes to walk to school. And I Googled how long it takes, and it was like 21 minutes. So it's like, okay, that was one area where my old brain hadn't screwed up and I was remembering things wrong, because we would stop, at different people's houses along the way. And because I was the furthest. And then the last guy was only like 5 minutes from the school. So we would kind of all go in groups, and, it was a lot of fun. Nowadays, like, you live 20 minutes from school, your kids, you got to drive them. They're not walking.
No one's walking. Yeah, not at all. Yeah, it's all driving. That's part of I think the morning traffic problems now.
Well, and even back then, my mom didn't like the route I took because we crossed the highway. And so the safer way would have added like 10 minutes to the ride, because we would have gone by the mall. We would have used the lights, and we would have taken the long way, but we would go there was like a hill at the end of the street, and then you climb over the hill, and then there's a freeway, and then we would just run across the freeway, as kids. Right. Yeah. And every morning, we would do that. And but you can't, I mean, now the kids wouldn't do it anyways, but the parents definitely wouldn't allow it.
Right.
So we're both wrestling fans. We're both Blue Jays fans. Die hard. I love that. I love that hat. I have.
I forget what I found, but people always commented, and I always forget I'm wearing that because I have multiple hats, like many people, and all of a sudden I forget I'm wearing this one, and they'll be like, "Man, that hat's awesome," and I'll think for a second, "What hat am I wearing?" But it always comes back to this one, and it's like,
it's the Canada Day. And it goes with your shirt.
Oh yeah. Got a match for you too.
Yeah. I have the Jets one that I was wearing. I wore in a few shows, and then I was showing my wife the video, because ever since I started, and especially when I go back and watch the early ones now, like I'm very. It's funny. Garrett told me, like, when you start doing YouTube, you're going to get really like sensitive about certain things, and so the lighting, like he used to always be on me about my lighting, and I'm like, it's fine, and and then now I go back and look at it, and it's like, oh my goodness, like I really need it. So I look back at some of those early ones, and I'm really like disgusted almost with my lighting. So now I'm working on the lighting. I think it looks better. And then the hat, like I'm showing my wife to show her the lighting, and she's like, don't wear that hat anymore. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, there you go.
She didn't like the hat. She's like, you got nice hair. Leave the hair. So I don't know.
Exactly.
I'm so sensitive about my hair.
Right. Well, and I don't have any hair under this, so
I've seen some pictures of you. Yeah, and that's cool. I assume you shave it.
Yeah, I shave it, and
Yeah,
I don't have to
because
shave much of it anymore. But
you
yeah,
don't like the once you start getting the bald spots. I've been lucky.
right.
My
Yeah.
dad, my dad died young, but when he still had his full head of hair and it was
Right.
dark, although we used to tease him. We figured he probably dyed it, but he claims he didn't. I don't know. I only him and my stepmom know, but
Right. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Some things we don't need to know. Right.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly,
Exactly.
yeah. So, you see on the screen there, if people are watching, you are
Mhm.
a naturopathic doctor,
Right.
which I don't think I've ever heard that term. I got that from your
Right.
Facebook. I knew you were a
Yep.
doctor,
Yep.
and obviously you're very successful. So congratulations on
Oh,
that.
well, thank you.
But what exactly is a naturopathic doctor?
Yeah, it's a good question because it can mean something totally different depending where you live,
Okay.
even where you are compared to here in BC. So I do have naturopathic doctor colleagues in your province, but their scope of practice isn't quite as big because it's different regulations.
Hmm.
But and this is something I like to explain because there is some people here and they've heard about it and they think it means one thing and what really means something else. So a naturopathic doctor here in Canada, we are a regulated healthcare profession, but here in BC, we have pretty much almost the same scope as your general family doctor does.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is, we have the ability to test, diagnose, and treat patients. We can send them for lab testing. But then, what a naturopathic doctor is really is kind of looking at more so the whole person as opposed to maybe just different systems, different little pieces of someone's health. But the bigger part of it as well is kind of philosophy differences when it comes to medicine, in the sense of when it comes to naturopathic medicine, we always strive to find the root cause, and not that
Mm,
conventional medicine doesn't. Believe me, they do. But the way our healthcare system is set up here in Canada, a lot of our family doctors don't have a lot of time to spend with every patient. Their
right.
patient load is huge here in BC. There's about 30% of population doesn't have a family doctor any longer. There's just not many around anymore, and so they got to kind of have very quick conversations with their patients. And a lot of times that's not enough to really get into what's going on. So that's where we come in. Like my initial appointment with patients is 1 hour. My follow-ups
Okay.
are minimum 30 minutes, 30 to 60 minutes. But in naturopathic medical school training, we learn all pretty much the same things that we people learn in conventional medical school, but we have some different things. For example, very well versed in herbal medications and clinical
Hmm.
nutrition, and acupuncture. I do IV therapy, intravenous
Oh,
therapies, and things such as that. Some injection therapies, but here in BC, we can also prescribe pretty much the same pharmaceuticals that family doctor can. So we're kind of like a one-stop shop in a sense, if you want to kind of make it in that sense.
mhm.
But and that's how I look at medicine specifically. I can't speak for all my colleagues; they're naturopathic doctors, but I don't look at medicine as this versus this. I look at
Mhm.
it, putting it all together. There's different pieces we can bring from every aspect, and in my practice, my gastrointestinal disorders is my heavy focus. So I treat a ton of that. I teach a lot about it, and so on and so forth.
So that's kind of what I figured it was, just based
Yeah.
on, like following you on, seeing what you post on Facebook and stuff, and just judging by the name and trying to work it out without Googling it, because I
Right.
deliberately didn't want to Google it because I wanted to hear you describe it. But yeah, and so that's super interesting. So you're interested in, like you said, the whole person, as opposed to, just going after whatever's wrong. Like, so you can like look at like an ulcer, for instance, and
Mhm.
say, okay, we can treat the ulcer, or we can try to figure out what's causing the ulcer and treat
Right.
that.
That's a
As a
perfect
simplistic
example.
way of looking at it, you
No,
know.
it's actually a really good example because, for example, most ulcers are caused by what's called a H. pylori bacterial infection of the stomach lining or beginning of the small intestines. And it's an infection, but it's an opportunistic infection. A lot of us harbor H. pylori in our gut, but for many of us, it doesn't turn into an infection unless it has a chance to. So a lot of times, patients develop the symptoms of an ulcer. They get tested for an H. pylori infection. It comes back positive. They get
Mhm.
the antibiotics. They get the antacid. They clear it, but the way that maybe myself will look at it, or another doctor thinks this way, is okay. Well, what allowed bacterial infection to flourish. And if it is, for example, due to stress, which can help lower the immune system, which then
Hmm.
allows this infection to take hold, then look at the patient's stress levels, look at how they're
Gotcha.
coping with things, and not just here's your antibiotics, follow up in 4 weeks and just make sure your stomach pain and heartburn are gone. And but beyond that, what can we do to prevent this from happening again? Things like that.
So it's not necessarily the stress that causes it, but it's the stress that puts added, pressure on other parts of your body that doesn't allow you to fight it. So,
Exactly. And
gotcha.
this is
Gotcha.
again a perfect example of like how we learn in medicine, because
Yeah.
decades ago they used to call them stress ulcers,
Right.
right? And be like, oh, I get an ulcer when my ulcer flares up when I get stressed out. What they were missing at that time was they didn't know H. pylori existed.
Gotcha.
And then they realize, oh, that's the stress connection with developing an ulcer, is the chronic stress or really bad acute stress can allow the bacteria to cause an infection by the immune system likely being depressed.
Hmm. So so listening to you describe that and thinking about it, it kind of, I'm going to bring it back to something we talk about a lot. And people that are watching the show that know both of us may want to hear us, talk about this.
Mhm.
So when we talk about, we'll talk about wrestling a lot in our fight game media group, right?
Yeah.
And so when we, and I'm super into the ratings, and you are too, you always
Right.
post the ratings articles and stuff. And what are you drinking? Coffee?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Coffee. Salt Spring.
Oh,
Coffee. So off Salt Spring Island, there's
oh wow.
yeah, coffee bean company. It's been around for a long time now, and this is their West Coast blends, dark roast blend.
I just got water here, but I was drinking Tim's. I just finished my cup right before we started.
Nice.
Yeah. So back to what I was saying was, so everyone will always come up with these, ideas of, okay, why were the ratings up? Why were the ratings down? And so, and the reasons will make sense, but thinking the way that you probably think is, I'm thinking that you are not necessarily like, there's causation and then there's the deeper root of, so people might say, like, for instance, we had this thing a little while ago where, the AW ratings were down for a certain period of time and people were
Mhm.
saying, oh, it's the West Coast feed.
Right.
So if you go into it with the mindset that it's the West Coast feed, you can find things to prove your point, but you're going to look at the overall picture and determine, okay, yeah, it might be the West Coast thing. It might be this, it might be that, it might be a
Mhm.
combination of all of these things.
Yeah.
So, if you're trying to decide, so I think that, you being, a trained, doctor, I think that you're probably looking at a lot of things differently than
Yeah.
how most people look at them. And
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
just one example, but
Yeah.
yeah, like I can't imagine you can't get away from that line of thinking because that's how you're
Yeah.
trained, right?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that, because it's I mean, we all have our own bias that we bring into all
Sure.
these things, right? Me as a
Hmm.
big AEW fan, I
Yeah,
want there to be a reason why maybe the viewership's going down, that's outside outside of the realm of well, maybe it's just things aren't catching on with some people. But
sure.
keeping that aside, I always try to keep that part aside and be like, hey, what are the reasons, the West Coast thing? But then when that data came out that the East Coast dropped at about the same rate during the
And
same
then
time.
you look at, well, there's basketball season.
Right.
So, and
Yep.
that makes sense too.
Yep.
Then
Yep.
there's, certain wrestlers are gone.
Right.
So now they're
Yep.
back. Are the ratings going to
Exactly.
go up again?
Right. Yep.
But
So it's
but we
almost like
still,
multiple root causes
yeah.
coming in, and
So you can kind
yeah.
of put these pieces together in your head. And I'd imagine you, again, as a doctor and as a bit of I'm blanking on the word, but the someone who, like, diagnostic technician, is that a
Well,
phrase? Is that kind of
well, yeah. That's
so,
I can see that fit. Yeah.
as
Yeah.
someone who wants to figure out what's causing things,
Right.
so if you can actually come up with that idea, then you feel like you've accomplished something, even though you don't
Yeah.
really have a rooting interest in it at all. But
Right.
well, you do have a rooting interest, but you don't
Yeah.
have a stake in the game.
Right.
It doesn't
Exactly.
really, if they do
Yeah.
2 million viewers, or if they do 500,000 viewers, it's not going to change your life at all.
Right. Right. Yeah.
You'll enjoy it, but
Yeah.
and you're a fan and you're rooting. It's just like your
Right.
teams.
Exactly.
Yeah, the baseball, hockey, boo, Flames.
Yeah. Yeah. I was waiting
Do
for
you
that.
follow Ryan Pike?
Oh, and right back on Facebook.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
on Twitter too, though. He's
Yeah.
like, he writes for Flames Nation.
You know what? I don't think I follow him on Twitter. I'm
Oh,
gonna
you
have
got
to.
to.
I
You'll
know
get
he
the
I know he I know he does that. But
yeah.
I just realized I don't know if I follow him on
Oh,
Twitter,
you
so I'll
got
have
to.
to. Yeah.
He's got the best Flames information. Like I don't even
Yeah.
care about the Flames, and I know more about them than I need to.
Right.
He goes in
Yeah.
depth,
Yeah.
and he actually got mentioned by Elliot Friedman on a national podcast not that long
Did
ago.
he?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So it
That's
was.
making it when Elliot
He
mentioned
said,
you.
well, 15 minutes after he had 250 new followers
There
right
you go.
after Elliot dropped his
Yeah.
name. Yeah.
That's awesome.
But yeah, he's a cool dude.
Yeah.
I've known
Yeah.
him forever.
Yeah.
So you watch wrestling with your son, and I saw
Yeah.
you posted a picture of him recently where he's starting to look like Hook.
A little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Unintentionally too.
uncanny. It's
Yeah.
uncanny.
Yeah.
Now, how like so he's still into it, or is he like? I
Yeah.
know when you're a little kid, like obviously like they're gonna follow whatever dad brings them to, but
Right.
if you can maintain, he looks like he's what, about 13.
Exactly 13.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I just did that from looking at them.
Yeah.
By the time they're 13, they're starting to, find their own things.
Oh yeah.
So if he's still into it by that point, he's probably going to stay into it.
Yeah.
And especially having an AEW that
Yeah.
is actively catering to him as opposed to WWE, which
Right.
is actively trying to turn him away. It
No,
seems.
I think that's exact it
Yeah.
because we don't like we discussed before like on the board and everything
Yeah.
like we don't watch a lot of the weekly WWE shows now,
Yeah.
and we'll pick and choose certain things like we made sure to watch the Seth Roman face to face stuff on last SmackDown and that type of thing because he's a big Seth fan still, of
He
course.
is. Okay.
Yeah, and so, and then we'll watch their the big shows and everything, but like pay-per-views and everything. But totally like the product style, like I mean, it's he's definitely old enough to understand like how it just doesn't make sense half the time. And so I mean I don't have to say it
Does
for him
he
to
does he
realize it.
watch on his own, or does he only watch with you?
Pretty much just with me. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we always kind of carve out that time. So right
Yeah.
now it's mainly Wednesday nights and not usually Friday nights because we've had that
Yeah.
conversation how TSN
Yeah.
showing Rampage, but we'll usually watch it on Saturday or Sunday.
But if he do you figure that if it was up to him, and let's say you were, let's say you're not around, maybe you had to go on a
Mhm.
trip or something like that,
Mhm.
would he still watch it on his own?
He'd probably wait.
He'd
Yeah.
wait. Okay.
Yeah.
Because it's
But
your
if
thing.
right, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
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 I went through when my son, my second oldest, he's 23 now. When he was around that age, he was into wrestling for a little bit, and but he did, he could take it or leave it. So I kind of stopped asking him to watch with me, but that was again, it was just WWE at the time, and now, I mean, he wouldn't even look at it. But we watched The Sopranos.
Oh, yeah.
And so we watched the whole series all the way through, and literally, like every time he was around, because he was busy and he was doing a lot of things, but if he had time, he would sit and watch it with me. He would never watch it on his own, and I wouldn't watch it on my own, even though I'd seen it before. But I was doing a rewatch with him, and we
Right.
would carve out that time,
Yeah.
whether it's going to be an hour, maybe we're going to do one episode, 2 episodes, and we got through the whole series. And
Nice.
it's one of my fondest memories, just sitting on the couch with him and
Right.
watching that whole series and talking about it. And
Yeah.
as I was watching it, I was reading reviews, and kind of doing where they do those deep dives into different shows. So I was pointing things
Yeah.
out to him and saying, hey, watch out for that, remember that, stuff like that. And so I really got a lot out of it the second time I watched it.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a big part of it when it comes to that. It's not the product we're just watching; it's the time we spent week after
Exactly.
week since he got into it, and which is quite a few years ago now. And so that's why, like I've had this conversation with you too, is that I want the other guys to get better.
Exactly.
I
Yeah,
want
yeah,
them
yeah.
to because then it gives me more reason as he gets older. Like, oh, let's watch it. It's good, and all that. But right now, we're just not getting that reason. Then it just feels like, yeah, this is neither one of us want to spend that time doing it, and so
Well,
life's busy enough. And so I wish they would get better. So there's a reason to sit down even more.
but even if they did, I mean, in a way, like you only got so much time.
Oh, of
So,
course.
if they've got 3 hours on Monday and
Yeah.
2 hours on Friday and another 2 hours on Tuesday, then you've got AEW on Wednesday and
Yep.
another hour on Friday. Like you're already not watching the 1 hour of AEW,
Yeah.
because although you are watching it, but you're watching it later.
Right.
So you may start having to pick and choose. And,
Yeah.
let's say WWE got really good, you might have to stop watching AEW, like, because you only
Right.
have that certain amount of time. So,
Right.
but you think about it though now, and when his, 20 years from now, when he's older and he's got a wife and his own kids, he's going to be remembering the times that he spent with you, watching
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
shows, and he's going to be saying,
Yeah.
"Hey, I remember growing up and watching Hook and MJF and,
Right. Right.
Hangman Page and stuff."
Yeah.
And, like, so it's
Yeah.
kind of cool when you think about it that way.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
totally. And it's and so I hope, I envision it continuing.
yeah.
And then at some point, different factors, different things, it may get less and less, but until then, I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
see. And with me, it's like I remember I brought my so my son I referenced earlier, and his sister. So I don't know how much you know about my story, but like my
Mm.
four youngest kids are not mine by birth. So
Right.
these were the two oldest. And I brought them to wrestling, a couple different wrestling events, and this was around the time when the Miz was like starting to gain some steam. And
Hmm.
we went to the show, and my daughter insisted on me buying her a Miz t-shirt. So I
Yeah.
bought her the one, that I am awesome one,
Yeah.
and then I bought a matching one, so we would wear those together. But so
Nice.
these are the memories I have, is
Right.
the Miz.
Right.
So
The
it's
business
not
part of
not
it. Yeah.
quite not quite the fondness.
Yeah.
And then their younger sister, Sydney, she all of a sudden, she saw us going to the wrestling shows, and she decided she wanted to watch wrestling too. So she chose Saturday Morning Slam, if you
Yeah.
remember that. And
Yeah.
so we were watching that every Saturday morning. I would record it, and then when she woke up, we would watch it. And and we had a lot of fun watching that. And she kind
Yeah.
of, she didn't really like it, but I think she just liked spending the time with me.
Yeah.
And we
Right.
watched it for maybe 6 months, and
Right.
she remembers it. I don't know if you I brought her to Vegas one year, and
Hmm.
we did the Q&A in the suite party. And
Yeah.
this was like the first Q&A, the first live Q&A with Dave. Like, now they rent a room and they have a mic and they do the whole thing, right? This
Hmm.
was very informal. We were in a room, and people would just come and they'd grab a mic and they'd ask Dave a question, like face to face.
Hmm.
And she went and she grabbed the mic and she asked him a question: "Why do you even like wrestling?" And and it's so funny. It made the best of, like, the year-end
No.
compilation. And
No kidding.
and he laughed and everybody laughed, and he just said, "Well, I don't know." And he tried to explain it, and he's like, "Why do you
Yeah.
think your dad likes wrestling?" And she looks at
Yeah.
me and she says, "I have no idea."
I have no been trying to figure that out for years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah,
That's it.
so
I'm gonna have to track that show down because I'd be really interested to hear how Dave answered it because
yeah, it
no,
was
because you never hear him explain. I mean, we know what he likes, but
all
but he's very analytical about it, right?
I-
Of almost like the emotional side of it. I'd love to hear more about that.
I'll try to find it. It's so hard to find
I know.
with right now
Oh, the
on
new site.
because
Yeah.
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 So, but I mean, there's ways to do it. So I'll try to find it and I'll send you the link.
Perfect.
Yeah, it was on. It would have been a Wrestling Observer Radio,
Yeah.
not Brian and Vinny. And yeah, and I was on there too. And I kind of made the joke because I'd known Dave for years by that point, and I grabbed the mic and I'm like, "Hey, Dave, long time listener, first time caller," and
Yeah.
he laughed. And yeah, and I don't remember what I asked him, but it was
Right.
her. But that was the one. I don't know if you remember, if you were listening at that time. There was a guy named Liam, and he was basically dominating the conversation. He kept grabbing the mic from people,
Really?
and yeah, and he was being like, it wasn't like people criticize him. The board went crazy over this guy. Like,
Oh,
they were
sure.
just crucifying him. But I mean, it wasn't that bad when you go back and listen to it. But
Right.
he actually even grabbed the mic from Sydney, like he was just,
Really?
yeah. And I got to know him, and he's a
Yeah.
nice guy. And
Yeah.
maybe I'll even have him on the show someday.
Yeah.
But so that was so after that, that's when they decided, okay, we got to formalize this thing a little bit more, and
Yeah.
to try
Just
and
can't grab the mic.
have some structure. And yeah, so they went to renting a room and having it be more formalized, having a host and pre-ask
Yeah.
questions and stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
More professional that way too.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
this was very Yeah, very unprofessional, I would
Right,
say.
right,
Just a bunch of drunks in a room asking
right.
questions. Yeah.
Well, just like you said earlier, when you start doing these things, you start learning, looking back at how you
Hmm.
started, and well, that's what they can look back at and be like, "What were we thinking?"
Exactly. Yeah,
Right?
exactly. All right. So, we're almost out of time. I told you I was going to be 20 to 30 minutes, and we're getting up on the 30-minute mark. I just want to
Mm.
make sure, was there anything, when I asked you to do this that you had in mind that you wanted to talk about that we haven't got to, or
No, I just wanted to just have it to chat with you and let you lead
great.
it. Like I like like as you know, I watch most of your episodes, and I love how each one has some similarities and a lot of them are different.
Yeah.
And a lot of that you can tell is just because it's just, like if people maybe watching this one the first time, Paul didn't text me like, oh, I'm going to ask this question. I'm going to ask
Yeah.
this question. It's just like, I'll send you the link right before we start and then we'll just start. But because I watched your shows, I kind of had an idea that was the
That
way it is. And
helps.
I kind of like that. And
Yeah.
yeah,
It's a free flowing conversation.
right. And it can go any which way then.
Yeah,
And
and then if
yeah,
we, and if we do this again, and hopefully, hopefully I'll have you on. Hopefully you'll agree to do
yeah,
it.
be happy to.
We'll, it might be a completely different show.
Right.
And I'm actually like I'd been doing 3 a week up until now, and I'm kind of going to scale that back a little bit, just because I think that especially for people that maybe want to watch everyone, they may not have time to watch 3 in a week. So,
Sure.
I'm probably going to do, I'm definitely going to do for sure at least one and maybe two. So if I can get like a special guest, like I had Cole Cabana, or
Yeah,
if I
that's
can get
cool.
Dave Meltzer or anything like that, that'll be my second episode. But I'm
Yep.
going to schedule one, and then I've got a few irons in the fire, waiting for people to get back to me and stuff. There's a few I'm waiting on right now. Dave is one I've been trying to.
Yeah.
We're back and forth, and he's just so busy.
Yeah. You
But
probably just have to catch him in the exact right moment.
exactly, he will
Yeah.
be on at some point.
Yeah.
And I've had Brian, and
Yeah.
and there's a few wrestlers even that I've asked, and I haven't heard back. It's funny, nobody's actually said no, but there's some people that hasn't answered. So I
Right.
kind
Right.
of take the not answering as a no, and they just don't want to be
Yeah.
mean and say no.
Well,
But
possibly. We never know.
yeah. Yeah, and you never know. Like I think if I ever move this to like F4W or something like that, I'll probably be able to get like bigger guests. But I
Yeah.
don't ever want to stop having these kind of conversations.
Yeah.
So if I do that, what I might end up doing is having one on my own site and then one on the F4W. If I'm having like a
Right.
bigger name guest or whatever. So,
Yeah.
but not that you're not a big name.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you're very successful. And like I've referenced this conversation. I had a conversation with Shad Gaspard.
Hmm.
I talked about this on the show I did with Ed in
That
San
was a great
Antonio.
show, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
That
Thank
was
you.
a great one.
But
Yeah.
but it's the same thing. Like, and I don't know, I don't know what you seem very successful. I would imagine that probably 90% of the wrestlers out there, that you're watching on a regular basis would kill to have the kind of lifestyle you have, would be my guess. And,
In which way?
just, like not necessarily how you live, but the things you have.
Mm.
Like nice house, the money in the bank, kids, stability, all that kind of
Sure.
thing.
Yeah.
And talking to Shad, like, and I was like, oh, it's really cool, like you're famous and all blah blah blah. And he's like, well, what do you do? And he's asking me
Yeah.
questions about my own life, and he's like,
Right.
like that's the goal, and
Yeah.
most of us don't get there. You've
Right.
made it, so don't ever look
Yeah.
at me and say, oh, I
Yeah.
wish I was like him.
Yeah.
Be happy with what you have. And
Yeah.
it really caused me to think about things differently.
Well, exactly, because I think a lot of us get caught up thinking that everyone we see on TV is doing it because they just want to be famous.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that comes with everything you just said, but a lot of times it doesn't. But it looks like they're fulfilling their dream because they're on TV or people know their name or they have 30,000 Twitter followers. But but you're right. It's what everyone kind of wants is that stability and to also do what they love doing, right? And so
Exactly. Yeah.
that's a key for, and I'm sure most people that are in the wrestling business are doing what they love doing, although that can maybe change over time. But but yeah, no, I totally get that. Yeah.
Well, when you're retired, like, all of a sudden, like your time at the top, like in AEW or WWE might not be that long. And then, you lose your job, you quit, whatever.
Mhm.
Now you're working indies, or, you got to get a regular job.
Yep.
And some people are going to do better at that than others, and I've got
Yeah.
friends, that used to work, in WWE, and, there's some are doing well, some aren't doing so well.
Right.
So, yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, interesting. So yeah, so we're going to wrap this thing up. Thanks a lot for taking the time to talk to me, Preet.
My pleasure.
And I look forward to doing it again sometime.
Definitely.
So for Preet, I'm Grampa Dez, and this has been Cup of Joe with Grandpa Dez.